Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into a recent, deeply charged opinion broadcast that unpacks some of the most intense cultural clashes happening right now across sports, media, and national politics. Whether you follow these controversies super closely or you're just trying to make sense of today's crazy cultural landscape, our goal today is to objectively break down exactly what's being argued in our source material. We are going to look closely at how public figures are navigating some really heavy institutional backlash. Let's get into it. Okay, let's run through our roadmap really quick. We'll be hitting 4 main topics today. 1. Debates over women's sports. 2. Claims of media censorship. 3. Presidential debate defenses analyzed. And finally, 4. The Sussexes leave California. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the debates over women's sports. We're going to start by looking at the WNBA and the massive ongoing conversation surrounding biological sex. This whole segment was really sparked by Indiana Fever guard Sophie Cunningham, who plainly stated, keeping men out of women's sports is common sense. The commentators absolutely loved this. They enthusiastically rallied behind her statements, basically framing her as this fearless, courageous voice who isn't afraid to challenge league leadership right to their faces. The panel argued that her sentiment is pretty much a slam dunk in broader American culture, even if it's causing some serious friction inside the league itself. But, she didn't just stop there. That friction led to a major demand that the panel highlighted heavily. Cunningham took direct aim at the WNBA leadership, saying that a league unable to literally define what a woman is might just need a new commissioner by the end of the year. The commentators totally amplified this call for a bold leader, someone who actually prioritizes the female players over their own personal or political interests. And now, this conflict is spilling way off the court. We're talking about a recent legal letter from the Alliance Defending Freedom, which alleges the WNBA is actually intimidating and silencing its own fans. The commentators pointed out some wild incidents where attendees were reportedly forced to cover up shirts that just said XXXY, and even had pro-women's sports posters confiscated at games. The panel's take on this? They argued that league officials are just too cowardly to confront Cunningham directly, so they're allegedly taking it out on the fans, which could potentially open up the WNBA to massive legal liability for censorship. To kind of wrap up this sports segment, the panel painted a really stark contrast between Sophie Cunningham's very vocal stance and Caitlin Clark's general attempt to just stay neutral. The commentators argued that Clark's desire to just focus on basketball and avoid the cultural debate hasn't actually protected her at all. They pointed out she's still being relentlessly targeted on the court and hasn't really gotten a strong public defense from league officials. So the big takeaway from the panel? You might as well find the courage of your convictions and take a stand, because staying neutral definitely won't shield you from the culture war. Moving right along to Section 2, claims of media censorship. Let's pivot over to the newsroom for a second. We've got a classic, fundamental clash here between a Seattle sports writer and his publisher. The columnist wanted to write a piece arguing that separating biological sexes in sports doesn't actually make a person transphobic, but he felt his voice was being completely stifled by the paper. On the flip side, the commentators alleged that the newspaper's real motivation for spiking the piece was pure fear. Specifically, they were terrified of triggering the cancel mob. And here is the absolute kicker. The commentators kept hammering home one specific number: 3. This wasn't just a one-off thing. This was literally the 3rd column on this exact topic that the paper had killed. The broadcast presented this number as undeniable proof of a pattern. To them, it's a direct, glaring example of ideological censorship by legacy media organizations that are just too terrified of public backlash. All right, Section 3, Presidential Debate Defenses Analyzed. We're shifting gears from sports and media straight into the heart of national politics. The panel zeroed in on this highly speculative, almost unbelievable question: was his drink laced? Following Joe Biden's heavily criticized debate performance, this wild narrative actually started floating around in public discourse as a potential excuse for what happened. The panel pulled this exact quote from Joe Biden talking about that debate. "There is no way anyone could have, God forbid, laced his drink or something." Now, what's super interesting to the commentators here is the massive shift in messaging. They noted that right after the debate, she was out there publicly praising his performance. But then the rhetoric totally shifted, first to exhaustion, then travel, and eventually to floating this highly speculative idea of foul play. To the panel, that shift was incredibly revealing. Now, the broadcast completely threw out that whole laced drink theory. They weren't buying it for a second. Instead, they unleashed a series of incredibly severe accusations against the Biden inner circle. They framed these shifting narratives as a deliberate active cover-up scandal designed to hide the president's mental decline from the country. They accused the administration of operating with sheer arrogance and this deep entitlement to power. One panelist even went as far as to argue that this wasn't even about preserving Joe Biden's legacy anymore, but rather Jill Biden desperately attempting to preserve her own. So why does the panel think this is still such a massive deal right now? Well, they argued that keeping this story in the news cycle is absolutely vital because it forces political leaders to answer a core question. What did you learn and what should you have done differently? The broadcast insisted that political figures must be held accountable for the decisions they made during the transition of power to Kamala Harris. In their view, if you can't answer that question honestly, you simply don't deserve to hold power. Finally, we hit Section 4. The Sussexes leave California. Let's look at what's going on with the British royal family. According to New York Post reporting that the panel dug into, Harry and Meghan's 6-year run in California was framed as this highly calculated but ultimately failed attempt to gain real American political clout. They arrived back in 2020, and claims suggest Meghan actually wanted Governor Gavin Newsom to appoint her to Kamala Harris's vacant Senate seat. That same year, they publicly threw their weight behind the Biden-Harris ticket, but post-2020, reports indicate they were completely rejected for a sit-down in the Oval Office. And now, fast forward to the present, and they are reportedly packing up and heading back to the UK. But wait, it wasn't just the political stuff that fizzled out. The commentators pointed out that their broader Californian ambitions just fell totally flat. Not only did they fail to gain that political influence they wanted, but they were also reportedly shut out by the elite California celebrity crowd. On top of that, their major commercial deals, like that massive, highly publicized Netflix contract, just did not perform the way anyone expected. The panel's blunt takeaway: if they were actually crushing it in California, they'd be staying for sure. The segment wrapped up this whole topic with a pretty sarcastic, highly partisan jab from one of the panelists, who directly linked the couple's royal exit back to conservative political rhetoric. They said, President Trump promised to deport the worst of the worst. I guess promises made, promises kept. By dropping this quote, the broadcast very neatly tied what seems like a Hollywood celebrity gossip story right back into the larger, heavy political themes of the show. Well, that brings us to the end of our analysis for today. Before you go, I want to leave you with one big, absolutely crucial question to chew on. How should our media, sports, and political institutions navigate these incredibly polarized public debates moving forward? From the basketball courts to the newsrooms and all the way up to the highest levels of government, these cultural collisions are clearly only intensifying. Think about how the arguments we've explored today either challenge or confirm your own views on how our institutions react to public pressure. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning the narrative.